Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome back to Russian Through Propaganda. Today is day 57, and today we're talking about irregular nouns and then something a little bit different, short form adjectives. We could start with the poster here. Lenin жил, Lenin жив, Lenin будет жить. And these are lines from a poem by Mayakovsky, whom we'll meet later in this book. So we can understand a lot of this already, right? We know the verb жить. So we see Lenin жил, past tense, Lenin lived. And then let's skip to the third part. Lenin будет жить. That's obviously imperfective future. Lenin will live, right, in our hearts, of course. Though biologically speaking, he's dead. Okay, look at the middle part. This is what's a bit unusual. Lenin živ. So what on earth is that? We can see that it's related to žít, but it's not a verb form. It's a short form adjective, right? So that's what we're going to look at a little bit later today. Certain adjectives are often used in what we call the short form. Essentially, this form we see here, živ, is the short form of živoy, right? Živoy, which means alive or living or whatever, is an in-stressed adjective like большой or плохой. And here we see that it's long ending. The one we're used to has been lopped off here. So anyway, again, to translate all of this, Lenin lived, Lenin lives, or more literally, he is alive. And then future tense, Lenin will live. Okay, so let's start out for a moment with something we sort of glimpsed the other day when we introduced plural forms. We saw some examples of some that were just totally irregular, basically, right? Totally unpredictable. And a lot of these in Russian are, or at least the most common ones, are family members, right? Names for relatives and so forth. And we have here in the book on page 28, we have, I suppose, 10 of these, right? Very common ones. So let's just look these over. And again, we're seeing that they, for the most part, act normally in the singular. It's in the plural that they get weird, although a couple of them are also unusual in the singular. So they are, first of all, drug, right? Well, we've been using that already. It's a simple noun, just a hard masculine animate. But we see that the plural, the nominative plural is druzya. And of course, there's no way we could ever predict that, right? It's very unusual. Although, again, there are other examples in Russian of something quite similar, but we'll learn those later. Somewhat similarly, sin adds on a little ov, which is quite common in a lot of plurals of monosyllabic nouns in other Slavic languages. But in Russian, that's quite unusual, really. But so again, we're left. We can sort of chat about what's going on with certain irregular forms, but at the end of the day, we're just left to learn them and memorize them essentially. So the plural of sin is synovya, sons. Sestra is actually not that unusual, except that it involves what we were calling the other day a latent yaw, right? So we see sestra in the singular, the stress jumps back in the plural as we expect, but instead of getting siestri, as we might guess, we see that in fact it's a latent yaw, and so we end up with siostri. So that's not really too unusual, but I've included it here because it kind of falls in with this category of, irregular nouns referring to family members. Let's skip daughter for a moment. Let's look at child, rебенок. The plural of that in modern Russian is дети. And we see that that's an example of what's called suppletion, meaning that дети is a suppletive form of rебенок, meaning that it's although it's thought of nowadays as constituting a single word, meaning child, we can see clearly that these words historically are not related at all. They're built off different roots, right? So this is kind of a funny word. The word rебенок in the singular, meaning child, obviously, its actual plural, the actual historical plural of that specific word, rебенок, is ребята. And that's actually a very, very common expression in Russian, but it doesn't really mean children per se. It's something more like guys, right? So it's kind of it's not really slang. It's just kind of an informal, kind of familiar expression. And it's used a lot in classrooms. So if you ever have a Russian instructor, or me, if I'm in teaching class or whatever, I'll often refer to the group as ребята, meaning hey guys, or something like that. So nowadays it's taken on kind of this special meaning. So the standard plural nowadays for ребенок, the plural meaning children, is дети. And that's obviously the old singular of that would be ditya or something. There are a couple of different forms historically that would have been, again, historically the actual singular for дети. But nowadays in modern Russian, these two words, which were originally separate, have sort of fused together. One is used in the singular, the other in the plural. Okay, what about chazyayin? This means a master, like the master of the house, your host, your landlord, right? Someone who owns the house or something. Okay, the plural of that is chazyayeva, chazyayeva. So that could mean multiple male hosts or a couple who own the house, right? The master and the mistress, so to speak. The word, by the way, for the female, a landlady or mistress of a house or female host is chazyaika, and it's normal, by the way. Okay, brother, brat, plural, bratya. Again, that's totally unpredictable. Sasied becomes sasiedi. That the only thing weird about that, and it's very unusual indeed. I can't really think of another example in Russian where what is actually a hard noun becomes becomes soft in the plural, right? Note how we're going from a soft D in sasied to sasiedi, right? So that it not only is unpredictable, but that's very unusual in Russian. And again, we just kind of had to deal with it. Okay, and let's skip to the final example. Человек, which means a person or a human being. We've noted before, it's quite important that even though this word is grammatically masculine, it by no means implies that we're dealing with a man, right? A male person. This means a human being. It could refer to any human being of any gender, right? So keep that in mind. But again, grammatically, it is masculine. Okay, and the plural we see sort of like with child, the plural for human beings or people is люди, and we can see that that's a suppletive form. It's built off a totally different root. And so anyway, sometimes students will make the mistake of saying человеки, and oddly enough, that form is used, but it's rather weird, and it's used, for example, in Church Slavonic texts and like in the New Testament or whatever, and so it sounds rather weird. Okay, so again, we could talk about this form a bit historically, but in modern Russian, the plural of человек is люди. Okay, that leaves us, let's look back at the examples daughter and mother. These are somewhat unusual, and these are basically unusual. If we look these over, we see that they're essentially e-nouns, right? But they have a kind of a separate stem that's popping up in what we could call the oblique case forms. An oblique form basically means anything that's not like the nominative, right? Now, Deutsch here, the accusative, happens to be identical to the nominative, but we see in all the other forms where we're adding these special case endings, we're adding those actually to a different root, right? A slightly expanded form of the root. For example, dочер or mater. And by the way, these are old, Indo-European roots, and in fact, the long form looks more like the English daughter, dочер, right? Mater, mother. If you know other languages, you can think of, the cognates. So we can sort of, even based on English, we can sort of get some sense of what's going on here, right? But again, we're left at the end of the day just to memorize these forms. Okay, so try to familiarize yourself with these irregular forms. Obviously, these words are all extremely common, and so we just kind of need to learn them. Okay, so let's give some plurals here with noun adjective combinations, and let's watch out for irregulars in the plural. Kind of a chance to review here, right? Both normal nouns and ones that are quite unusual. Okay, starая книга in the plural would become starые книги. Remember, we're writing e there because of the 7-letter spelling rule. Старый друг, an old male friend. Okay, so plural would be старые друзья. Okay, so of course the adjective is not doing anything weird, but the noun itself is irregular, старые друзья. Okay, common mistake. You might want to circle number 3. We know this word подруга, meaning a female friend. It is a normal noun. Okay, so the plural of подруга is not подрузья, right? It's easy to think that it maybe should be, but it's just simply not. Okay, so old female friends is старые подруги. Again, E because of the 7-letter spelling rule. Number 4, хороший музей, soft masculine. Plural will be хорошие музеи. Okay, and again, хороший is not really a soft adjective, we're writing the E there again because of the 7-letter spelling rule. Okay, number 5, a good person. Okay, that человек, that's going to be weird in the plural. Good people will be хорошие люди. Number 6, Russian city. Okay, plural, do you remember? I think we've seen this. Город is one of those nouns, those masculine nouns that unpredictably take stressed a in the nominative plural. Okay, so Russian cities, the plural will be русские города. Русские города. So again, there's no way to know that. We have to learn that as part of the word город. And earlier in the chapter, of course, we saw some of these common masculine nouns that take the stressed a ending. Number 7, русский ребенок, plural, Russian children would be русские дети. Русские дети. Number 8, новый сосед, new neighbor. Okay, plural, the only thing weird is it's going to become soft for no apparent reason. Новые соседи. Новые соседи. By the way, again, if we just kind of compare that type of thing where the plural of a masculine animate noun becomes soft all of a sudden, that's very characteristic of other Slavic languages like Czech and Polish. So again, sometimes you see something that's kind of weird going on in Russian, and it may be sort of the norm in some other Slavic language, but in Russian, it's very unusual, and we just call it irregular. Okay, number 9, новая машина, new cars, новые машины. Very simple, feminine, hard feminine. Number 10, мое общежитие. Okay, that's a special soft neuter, right? Watch out for the neuter plurals, right? They're taking a or ya, not or e. So my dorms, мои общежития, right, ending in ya. Number 11, my brother. Okay, plural will be мои братья, very irregularly. Number 12, моя сестра, plural reveals the latent your, and we get мои сестры, my sisters. Okay, let's make some entire sentences plural. Right now, remember the pointing word это, as long as we're using это as the pointing word, it's never going to change, and that includes with regard to singular versus plural, right? It doesn't matter what we're pointing at, the pointing word это never changes. Это очень хороший человек. Okay, so how can we say these are good people? Very good people. Это очень хорошие люди. Number 2, это наш маленький ребенок. It's our little child. Let's say these are our little children. Это наши маленькие дети. Number 3, это его новый сосед. That's his new neighbor. Let's say these are his new neighbors. Это его новые соседи. Again, becoming soft, very oddly. Number 4, это ее дочь и сын. Let's say these are her daughters and sons. Это ее дочери и сыновья. And by the way, I forgot to mention earlier that you may remember back in book 1, we learned another word for daughter, дочка. Okay, so why did I give you that word? Well, in order to avoid giving you Deutsch, right? Because I was saving the word Deutsch for, later when we learn these irregular nouns just to kind of make your life a bit easier. But in just everyday spoken Russian, I would say that the word дочка, this diminutive, is far more common than Deutsch. Deutsch sounds a little bit formal, sort of in the way that mать is somewhat formal, and you would never call your mother mать, right? You would say mama, right? So mama is kind of the everyday Russian word for mother or mom, and дочка is more common, I would say, than the Russian Deutsch. So keep that in mind, right? You could just kind of avoid the word Deutsch in a lot of instances. Okay. Number 5, это мой старый русский друг. Let's say these are my old Russian friends. Это мои старые русские друзья. Number 6, это их брат и сестра. Let's say these are their brothers and sisters. Это их братья и сестры. Okay, so now let's look at short form adjectives. And I forgot a moment ago when I started this video that we have seen these before. I should have remembered that, but I forgot. So this is, again, just kind of reviewing in terms of discussing all of these noun and adjectival forms. Now, the good news is we've already looked at short form adjectives in the plural. right? Back when we were using them to modify pronouns like "они," right? So look these over now. Let's give the quick rundown on short form adjectives. This can be very confusing, so try to let this sink in. Okay, so historically, reaching back centuries, there were competing adjectival forms, basically two different sets of endings, one case endings. One set of endings were identical to noun endings. The other set of endings, which came later, if I recall, were based on pronouns. Right? We talked about this before, by the way. So, for example, if you think about the genitive adjective ending like ova, or in other forms yivoa, or like charoshava, we see that genitive ending looks exactly like the pronoun form yivoa, and that's indeed where it came from. Okay, so fast forward a little bit. So in modern Russian, these competing forms kind of lived alongside each other, like for example in Church Slavonic. But as time went on in Russian, the long pronoun-based adjectival forms came to be dominant, right? So we think of them as sort of the default, even as late as, say, the 19th century. But if you're reading 19th century literature, you can definitely see cases where the short form version of almost any adjective, almost any, is used quite often in a certain position. That is in the predicate position, right? So if you're using a predicate adjective like he is nice, he is certain, he is satisfied, or she is happy, etc., right? So subject, linking verb, adjective. Modern Russian strongly prefers the short form of the adjective in that predicate position. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that since the predicate adjective is always modifying the subject, it means that all case forms for the short form adjectives dropped out of Russian, right, except for the nominative, right? So it's very unusual, although I will say if you're reading poetry, you will see short form, for example, datives. I can think of a Lermontov poem right now called Желание, if you want to check this out. I think he says "По синему полю проскакать на том коне," right? I'm quoting that off the top of my head. But basically saying across the blue field. In modern Russian, that would be "По синему полю," but in the poem he says "По синему полю." And you can see that "you" is being used on both the noun and the adjective. Okay, so I'm getting way off topic here, sort of. Okay, so let's regroup a little bit. Okay, so in what's the picture like today? In today's Russian, in theory, you can use the short forms for all kinds of adjectives. Now, some adjectives like Ruski have no short form whatsoever, right? So there are adjectives in Russian that have zero short form, period, right? Again, looking back a little bit, maybe 50 to 100 or 150 years ago, you could take almost any adjective that does have a short form and you would use that in the predicate position. That's still possible, generally speaking, in Russian, but nowadays, more and more, it's really kind of a handful of very common adjectives that are used with any frequency in speech in their short form. Okay, so again, this is kind of a messy topic. Hopefully, you got kind of a sense of the drift historically of what's happened with these. And so, for learning purposes, especially for beginners, let's say two things. The first is that the list of adjectives that are used with any frequency in spoken Russian in their short forms is quite limited, and we see that on page 21. So here's kind of a nice summary. We've seen most of these before, I think, of some adjectives that are used all the time in their short form. And again, if they're used in the predicate position, we should think of these as the default, right? So if we want to say, for example, he is satisfied, он доволен, right? We would use the short form by default, especially if we're talking about kind of a passing state. Right, he's happy with his new apartment. Он доволен своей новой квартирой, for example. Now, could we use the long form in modern Russian in that predicate position? Yes, but that would normally imply kind of a permanent quality. Like if we say он довольный, it makes it sound like he's generally a satisfied person. He's happy in his life. He's happy with things. He doesn't complain, and that type of thing. Right, or to take another example, if we say он болен, that would mean he's sick, like he's got the cold, if not worse, right? But if we say on больной, that implies that he's kind of a sickly person. He's feeble, he's always sick, or maybe he has some chronic problem, God forbid. Okay, so So in modern Russian, the adjectives that are not on this little kind of short list, if you're reading text or hearing formal Russian or even informal, again, it just kind of depends on the usage and the particular adjective. You may hear short forms of other adjectives as well. But in terms of ones that are really commonly used, we have that on 29. Okay, enough. I know I've been through this whole spiel before, so I should really just shut up. Okay, let's practice using a few of these. Now, again, look at the table quickly and just recall that these short forms, since they always reach back to a subject, they're only used anymore in the nominative. So that explains why they only have 4 forms, right? Masculine, feminine, neuter, and then the plural, which goes for all genders. Okay, let's start with uverенly and go across the row there. And let's say the doctor is certain. Vrach uveren, right? Masculine. Now, plural, the doctors, vrachi uverenly. The doctors are certain. Number 3, the mother is certain. Mать uverena. Okay, note, check that you have only one N there in the short form. Okay, let's take gotovy. Let's say number 4, the articles are ready. Statyi gotovy. Number 5, the novel is ready or finished. Roman готов. Number 6, the letter is ready or finished. Письмо готово. Довольный. Okay, here, look at the black box there in the table. Right here in the masculine, we have mobile vowels coming in. Mobile yeah coming in to break up that final cluster in front of the N. So let's say my brother is satisfied or happy. Мой брат доволен. My brothers are happy. Мои братья довольны. Number 9, my landlords are not happy. Мои хозяева недовольны. Reminds me of a little party I threw back in 2000. Yeah, the year 2000 in Petersburg, and let's just say some furniture got broken. Okay, so мои хозяева не были довольны. Let's put it mildly. Okay, I reimburse them for the damage, obviously. Okay, it's just the kind of person I am. Okay, свободный, let's say, which can mean free or unoccupied, right? So let's say this place or this seat is free. Это место свободно. Number 11, these seats are free. Эти места свободны. 12, этот стол, this table is free. Этот стол свободен with the mobile vowel. Занятый, meaning busy, occupied. These tables are taken, right? They're busy. They're occupied, I should say. Эти столы заняты. Number 14, our sister is busy. Наша сестра занята. And number 15, our sisters, plural. Наши сестры заняты. And a little пословица there, мир тесен. Right? The world is tight or cramped. Now, there's a good example, right? Obviously, that's kind of a stock expression. It's a folk saying, but you see there that that's a short form being used in the predicate position, which is normal, but it's describing, theoretically, I guess, a permanent quality of the world, right? It's a small world. But here again, it's using the short form. So again, this is a bit unusual. We wouldn't, first of all, tiesny is quite not that common an adjective. It can be used in the short form. But again, we could talk ourselves silly with this stuff. So again, in terms of beginning Russian, right, you should really kind of stick to this table and focus on these few adjectives that are used just all the time in their short forms. And then just watch out for other uses of short forms as you learn more Russian. Okay, let's restate a few sentences with short adjectives in the plural. Okay, so make the subject plural and the verb plural, if any, and the adjective plural as well. Студентка была уверена. So the female student was certain. Plural would be студентки были уверены. Number 2, мой сын будет занят. My son will be busy. My sons will be busy. Мои сыновья будут, right, plural verb, заняты. Number 3, этот ребенок был голоден. This child was hungry. Plural, эти дети были голодны. Okay, number 4, наш друг очень пьян. Our friend is very drunk. Our friends are very drunk would be наши друзья очень пьяны. Right, they're very drunk. Number 5, это место будет свободно. Okay, so these seats will be free. Эти места будут свободны. By the way, это, that is not the pointing word это, that's the neuter modifying место, right? Meaning this seat, right? So there, that's the demonstrative adjective. So there we do change it because it's modifying a noun, right? Эти места будут свободны. Number 6, is this fly dead or alive? Alive or dead? Эти мухи, so these flies, эти мухи живые или мертвы? Number 7, his daughter was happy. Let's make that plural. Sorry, her daughter. Ее дочери были счастливы. Number 8, the athlete was very sick. Спортсмен был очень болен. Let's say that the athletes were very sick. Спортсмены были опять больны, right? They were again sick. I'm not reading my examples very carefully. He was опять, right? Not очень, but опять. He was again sick. He had gotten sick again. Number 9, задание наконец будет готово. Okay, so the assignment finally will be ready. Задания, right, with the я, the assignments, наконец будут готовы. Number 10, ты здорова или больна? Right, are you sick or are you well or sick? Okay, let's make that plural, which would of course be вы. Вы здоровы или больны? And number 11, I need a good friend. Мне нужен хороший друг. Okay, let's say I need good friends. Мне нужны хорошие друзья. Nice poster here. Будьте бдительны. Be vigilant. Right? These calls for бдительность, meaning vigilance. There are a lot of propaganda posters that involve that kind of language, right? Be vigilant. Keep an eye on your neighbor. Be nosy. You definitely want to report them to the KGB if you see them doing something politically suspect, or if you'd like maybe to steal their apartment, that kind of thing. Okay, so obviously this stuff about denouncing your fellow citizens to the secret police is kind of a charged historical topic. Okay, let's look at a couple of, I think, new short form adjectives that we haven't seen before to talk about people. First one is похожий. Okay, so there's the long form, which of course can be used, but very common also is the short form, right? Похож, похоже, похоже, похожий, meaning resembling or something. So look at an example. Сын похож на отца. Literally, we could say something like, the son is similar to his father, or, the son is resembling to his father or something. Okay, so kind of hard to translate smoothly. We just say in English, of course, he looks like his father. He takes after his father. Okay, сын похож на отца. Let's take a feminine example. Дочь очень похожа на мать. Right, the daughter looks very much like her mother. Okay, let's take another one. Again, just another short form adjective. And this one really doesn't have a long form anymore at all. So again, that's quite unusual. But the short form is very common. Rad, rada, rada, radi. It means something like glad, basically. And it's followed by the dative, right? If you want to say you're glad about something, or you're happy about something in Russian, that's rad plus a dative form. It can also be followed by an infinitive if you mean you're happy to do something. So let's look at examples. Чему ты так рад, right? What are you so glad about? Мы вам очень рады. We're very glad, and then the dative вам, right? We translate that as something like, we're very happy to see you all, right? Мы вам очень рады. Another way to say the same thing with an infinitive would be, мы рады вас видеть. That's a rather common phrase, right? Happy to see you. Мы рады вас видеть. Okay, now we can also follow rad with an entire that clause, right? Using что in Russian. Мама очень рада, что я окончил университет. Папа тоже рад, конечно. Or another example, я так рад, что ты здесь. I'm so happy that you are here. Okay, let's try a few of these examples. Again, the grammar here is quite simple. I, masculine, look a lot like my dad. Я очень похож на отца. Number 2, the children look a lot like their parents. Дети, plural, Похожи на родителей. Okay, that form родители, by the way, is an accusative plural of an animate noun. It looks like genitive plural, so we're not going to learn that form until next chapter. Number 3, you all, plural, look a lot like each other. Вы очень похожи друг на друга. Number 4, what are you also happy about? Чему вы так рады? Right, again with the dative, чему. Number 5, they'll be glad that we came. Они будут рады, что мы пришли. She was glad to see me. Она была рада меня видеть. Okay, page 31. Here are a few kind of funny, again, stock phrases and sayings. Тот не лих, кто во хмелю тих. Kind of hard to translate. He is not dashing, who in inebriation is quiet, literally. So meaning if you're not having a good time when you're inebriated, then you're not a cool guy or something. You're not a very spirited fellow. By the way, that saying, if you want to hear it in action, I think it's in, let me think what movie. The third, the особенности русской рыбалки, right? The peculiarities of Russian fishing. Okay, it's a movie, one of my favorite Russian movies. Okay, пьян бывал, ума не пропивал. I've been drunk in my time, right? By the way, бывать is an iterative of the verb быть, right? So I've been drunk from time to time, but I didn't drink through my intellect, literally, right? Okay, reminds me of some other sayings that we'll learn later. Okay, родился мал, вырос пьян, помер старый, свету не видал. He was born small, grew up drunk, died old, and didn't see the world. By the way, that form svetu is a alternate, I'd call it an alternate genitive form being used here as the object of a negated verb, не видал. Vidать is think of it as more or less the same as видеть, right? You'll hear that used quite often. Again, in kind of certain phrases. Ни жив, ни мертв, neither alive nor dead, meaning someone's just stunned. Жив и здоров means alive and well. There in the masculine form, of course. Gol как сокол, right? Bear as a battering ram. By the way, in modern, that form sakol and that meaning is rather weird. A lot of people might read this as sokol, which in modern Russian means what is it? A falcon. Sorry, I was thinking hawk, falcon. The word for hawk is yastrib. Okay, so this doesn't mean a bear or naked as a hawk. It means as a falcon. It means literally as bare as a battering ram. And it's kind of like the English as poor as a church mouse, right? Someone doesn't have anything. Беден да честен means poor but honest. Okay, let's look at one more thing quickly. This is really useful stuff. I think we've been over it before. But let's look at the neuter forms of these short form adjectives, right? Like, for example, хорошо, интересно, right? Интересно, we're saying, although when we actually say the word, we're reducing the o to an sorry, интересно. Okay, so basically these neuter short forms ending in o usually. Okay, so those could be a couple of things in most cases. They could be the short form, the neuter short form of the adjective, or they could be adverbial forms, which we know also generally are formed by adding o to adjectives, right? Taking an adjective, getting rid of the long adjectival ending and adding o. Okay, so the first thing to keep in mind is that these forms ending in o are often grammatically a little bit ambiguous, right? Because they could be short form neuter adjectives or they could be adverbs, right? The form in most cases looks exactly the same. Okay, so often you would have to kind of analyze the sentence a little bit to see what we're really saying. So let's look at some simple examples. And again, these are all extremely simple utterances, right? Very common and quite simple, but again, all the more reason to really get a handle on what's going on here grammatically. Okay, so first thing, we could take the adverb actually, right? Like хорошо used adverbially in subjectless expressions. We talked a lot about that back in the day right? Здесь хорошо, meaning things are good here. Нам хорошо, meaning it's good for us. We're doing well. We feel well, etc. Нам было хорошо. Now there's where we see that, yes, this is a subjulous expression. Look at that verb, which looks like neuter singular, right? We reviewed that just the other day. Нам будет хорошо would be future tense. Okay, now again, in these expressions, we see here being used with the dative nam, nam, nam. This is a subjulous expression with an adverb. Okay, so these examples with хорошо, this is the adverb for well. Now compare that to, for example, это хорошо, meaning this is good, right? Now here we can kind of talk about this a little bit. I'm not sure it's worth getting into, right? Is this хорошо an adverb or an adjective? Well, if we're being really strict about it, it's actually an adverb, right? It's an adverb because we're using a pointing word, and strictly speaking, the pointing word can't be the subject of a sentence. But now, это could be the neuter form of a demonstrative pronoun, and so basically we could think, oh, it's easy for students to read this as хорошо being used as an adjective, right? Modifying a neuter subject это. Okay, now why is it not worth maybe splitting hairs over this? Because again, the forms would be identical, right? So it doesn't really matter here whether or not we take хорошо to be an adjective or as the adverb that it actually is. I think if we're kind of splitting hairs, because the forms are going to be the same. Okay, but utterances like this, это хорошо, это интересно, right? That's interesting. Это интересно. Это было очень интересно. Okay, again, using these forms in or. Now, look at another example, все понятно. There we clearly have a subject. Okay, so this example is not really ambiguous in the least, right? Все понятно, everything is understandable. Everything's understood, everything's clear, все понятно. That's clearly a subject expression, right? Because все obviously is not a pointing word. Okay, so let's just look over a few of these in the table here. Хорошо, плохо, понятно, странно, ясно, трудно, and so on and so forth. And again, we can see that these forms in or, they could be either neuter short form adjective or an adverb. Okay, so let's practice again, just leaving the grammar aside. Just let's create some of these very simple expressions. That's strange. Это странно. Это странно. This is really easy. Это очень легко. Это очень легко. That will be bad. Это будет плохо. Это будет плохо. Everything's clear. Все ясно. Or все понятно. Все ясно. Все понятно. There we clearly do have a subject. Все. Number 5, that was obvious. Это было очевидно. Это было очевидно. Is that even... Actually, I'm sorry, I was using an adjective that isn't here. No, yes, it is. It is here. Sorry, in the second column. Это очевидно. Literally, it can be seen by the eyes, right? Obvious. By the way, if any Latin scholars, obvious derives from the Latin. Basically, it means literally something that's standing right in your path, right? Something you can't help but run into, obvious. In Russian, очевидный means it's something you can see with your очи, очи being an older form of глаза, eyes. Okay, yeah, we had that in this chapter, actually. That's so awful. Это так ужасно. Это так ужасно. Or это так страшно. Это так страшно. Number 8, this will be hard. Это будет трудно. Это будет трудно. Okay, so that does it for today. Fairly simple grammar, more review. Tomorrow we'll start talking about numbers finally. Okay, so that's it for today. Until next time, до свидания, товарищи. Вперед к новым победам.